This show powered by AgriGold for Central Illinois, your AgriGold reps Brett Lahr. He is your AgriGold reps for Central Illinois. Today's edition of Back Roads of Illinois, we were bringing the farming sources and information about the agricultural industry. I am Cesar Delgado. I am the host of Back Roads of Illinois. We were discussing about the grain markets for today's program with Ed Usset from the University of Minnesota. Also, we will be talking about the harvest season in northern Kentucky with a farmer and down there with Gracie ememm from Kentucky. Finally, we were talking about the cash markets with Nick Paumen from hedges in Minnesota. Otherwise, this is your rural news sponsored by AgriGold. What is the crop condition in Brazil for right now? We were hearing about it. The crop conditions are looking good than last year. Also, we are watching the Argentinian peso. It's lose their value for the year. Tyson Food Plant in Grand Island, Nebraska. This plant will be shut down in Grand Island. The plant has 1,000 employees to be employment in Tyson Food in Grand Island, Nebraska. Lastly, December corn is expired on next Friday afternoon at the close. This been your rural news sponsored by AgriGold. We were coming back with Ed Usset from the University of Minnesota. I'm joining with Ed Usset from the University of Minnesota. We are watching the grain markets for next few months with the export to be opposed to it. We were discussing about that with Ed. Hey Ed, how are you in St. Paul?
Cesar, I'm doing great. We've had a couple of weeks of cold weather here in the North Country, which means the local ski areas are making snow and getting ready for the ski season. In fact, some of them have opened. And but we've got a warm-up coming this weekend.
I bet it's cold outside over there.
Yes, it is.
Let's start with our discussion on the world supply and soybean futures. Do you watching the sustaining in the beans complex?
Soybeans are having a hard time finding traction. Even though exports have been kind of good recently, they have been good recently. And yet I think the market is casting somewhat of a skeptical eye at things, maybe wondering if this is front loading by players who are worried about coming trade issues.
What is the export numbers for this week?
Oh, Cesar, I don't track them. I read them from other people, but they were very positive relative to the expected pace.
Can you make a summary of this harvest season in the upper Midwest?
Well, Minnesota was the disappointing state in the Corn Belt this year. Our corn yields and soybean yields were modest at best, and that is reflected in the basis numbers. It's not easy for the big processors, ethanol and soybean crushers, to buy wheat and soybeans. You've got the crushing plants in south central Minnesota paying 5 to 10 over for soybeans. You've got ethanol plants paying overs. And earlier this week, I was in South Dakota, and the ethanol plant in central South Dakota is paying 50 under for corn. They had a good crop in South Dakota, and here we are at 10 to 20 over. It's all about the small crop Minnesota had.
What is the yields?
Boy, I don't have, I want to say the corn yields were low 180s. Soybeans, probably, boy, I should know that, Cesar, and I don't. It was under 50. We did, however, not that many of your listeners care, but we set a record in spring wheat yields. But spring wheat is grown in the northwest part of the state, which had a good, very good growing season.
Are you serious about South Dakota?
Yeah, yeah. I couldn't believe how I thought their basis levels were normal to even wider than normal. And it's all based on they had a great crop in South Dakota. Where I drove on Monday and Tuesday, it's all corn and cattle, Cesar, and the cattle producers are very happy.
Well, good to hear from South Dakota. Now, what is your thoughts on the winter wheat planting season in Dakotas?
I think it got off to a good start in South Dakota, or a decent start. So, but winter wheat, good question, Caesar. There's a good split between winter and spring wheat in South Dakota, but winter wheat doesn't get up into North Dakota or even into Minnesota. We're a little too cold for the winter wheat. I think they're off to a decent start, though.
Is there any rain?
Uh, we've had some moisture, yes, here in Minnesota, certainly over the last 3, 4 weeks. We got some nice rains after the harvest finished up. Is it enough to recharge the soil completely? I can't say that, but we sure were dry, and the ground soaked that rain up real well.
Do you have any final thoughts or recap of our conversation about the grain cycle?
Well, like everyone else listening to you, Caesar, I'm wondering where we're going to go with trade policy when the new administration steps in. They are certainly making a lot of noise about getting serious with tariffs, and I'm unafraid of getting into those battles and the impact on ag. I have a hard time putting a positive spin on it, but let's see what happens. And otherwise, to your listeners who have grain in the bin, treat every rally as a selling opportunity. Don't get complacent. Sell rallies as you see them. It is early December of 2024. We got many months ahead of us. I like to believe that, for example, the corn and wheat markets, the cash prices could be modestly higher come next spring, early summer. Hoping that trade doesn't upset that too much. And new crop, I'm already looking ahead to 2025. Not anxious about getting any pricing done, but again, I'm going to be thinking hard about this 4, 5, 6, 7 months from now about getting some new crop sales on the books.
Of course, Ed. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Cesar. Always enjoy talking
This
with you.
is Ed Usset from the University of Minnesota on back roads of Illinois. This is your open bell numbers of the commodity market sponsored by Kyle Bumstead from Allendale Incorporated. December corn is up to 8 to 5 cents, but all of the contract is down. Corn futures are down at 6 to 5 cents. Soybean futures are up at 3 to 5 cents. Wheat futures are down at 4 to 10 cents. Let's go with livestock markets. How is the cattle markets and hogs markets for today's opening for this morning? Livestock markets is up except for lean hogs markets again. Cattle futures are up at 3 to 4 1/4. Feeder cattle are up at 8 to 5 cents. Lean hogs are down at 4 to 6 cents. Crude oil are up to 9 to 8 cents per barrel. Dow Jones is up to 8 cents. We were going to have a conversation about the Southern Corn Belt in Kentucky with Gracie from Lewisport, Kentucky. You're welcome to the show. We were looking for our conversation about updating on the harvest season in northern Kentucky. Let's begin with our discussion on the harvest season in northern Kentucky. Can you give us some update your season?
Yeah, so we're not quite done yet. We've got probably 50 acres left to go of soybeans, so it's taken us a little bit longer than usual because we got a lot of rain during planting season that set us back a little bit. So we're pushed back a little bit, but everything is going really smoothly and our yields are looking pretty good.
What is the yields for corn?
Our corn yields this year are not as good as usual because we did plant so late, but we're looking at around 200.
Can you tell us about your operation with your dad?
Yeah, so our operation is over 200 years old. It got started in 1813, so that would make me the eighth generation. And I've been farming since I was 15. My dad really encouraged me to get into it, and he has helped me every step of the way, and we've been farming together ever since.
How many acres?
We farm about 800 acres together.
What part of the state?
So Lewisport is in the northwestern side of the state. We're in the Ohio River bottoms. So our ground is pretty flat. For how small the county is, there are quite a few farmers there, though.
Nearby Illinois.
A little bit. From my house, if I were to drive towards Illinois, it would take me about an hour and a half to get there.
Hmm? Do you have any final thoughts or recap of our conversation about the summary of your harvest season in northern Kentucky?
No, I don't think so, but I do want to say thank you so much for having me on, Caesar. It was really nice to meet you and get to talk to you today.
Thanks, Gracie. This is Gracie Emma from Lewisport, Kentucky on back roads of Illinois. We were going to have a conversation about updating on cash markets in Minnesota. We were watching the grain markets for today's deal with the harvest season and the world supply. This will be putting it together for the farm economy. Okay, we were talking about that with Nick Paumen from CHS Hedges in Minnesota. Otherwise, welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Let's talk about the grain cycle and the cash markets for right now. How is that for right now, Nick?
Well, I would say it's kind of mediocre in Minnesota here. We're about a month after the peak of harvest was completed. The last few weeks have just been grain elevators have been executing on current train sales, maybe adding a couple more for December, trying to use up freight that's gotten cheaper on the railroad. But for the most part, harvest was pretty good in Minnesota. Yields were hurt by the late planted crops were hurt by the dryness that ensued from about mid-August on, and so the later planted stuff got hurt a little bit, but the early planted stuff, if it got up, did okay. Again, there were issues, here and there, but it's the next challenge is just going to be marketing this stuff in a futures environment that is kind of cyclical, range bound right now, and overall just pretty quiet. So we're working on cleaning up old stuff, or cleaning up the crop that's in the bin, or starting to market the crop that's in the bin, and see where prices take us in the coming months.
How about the wheat basis in Dakotas?
The spring wheat basis, I would say, has been fairly strong. The spot floor market's been pretty active. High pro stuff has been bringing a pretty good premium. And really exports have been fairly good for wheat this year. We're seeing some pretty good lineups out there in the P&W market, as far as boats waiting to load. But its basis is pretty good, I would say. I don't think anyone's really screaming for wheat right now. I think there's plenty of it to go around. Again, it's just a matter of where do the bids need to be to get it to move from the farmer, and then obviously to turn around and sell it on the backside. So.
How many of cash markets been to ship for export to overseas?
Could you repeat the question again for me, Cesar?
How many of cash markets been to ship for export to overseas?
So how many markets ship out there? Is that what you're asking?
Can you over review of this growing season?
Yeah, I mean, again, the growing season, obviously, we had plenty of rain through the summer. June, July were pretty, I don't want to say wet months, but there was ample moisture for the crop. Early planted stuff. Like I said, we hit the insurance state in Minnesota here, and had some stuff go on the ground, and then the weather kind of changed a little bit, and the bulk of the crop got planted in May, which is typical. But then we had plenty of drowned out spots too, where we had excess rain that fell, low spots and fields drowned out, and we had those challenges that the farmers had to face this year. We had plenty of rain, plenty of sun and heat this summer, but again, the later planted stuff got hurt by the dryness and heat that kicked in, from about mid-August through the end of September, really in October too. I mean, most of harvest was done in Minnesota by the end of middle to end of November. I mean, even early November, a lot of areas were starting to wrap up. It just was a very fast-paced harvest because we didn't have any rain. that slowed the combines down. If we did, it was minimal where they could get right back at it. So the fall was very fast paced. Elevators were drinking from a fire hose, trying to handle the grain that was coming to town and manage the freight they had available to them as well.
Is there anything else that farmers need to know about the basis from CHS?
Well, it's just going to be one of those. It's as far as futures and basis, it's going to be recognizing the opportunity that could be coming up in the next few months. It's going to be a tougher marketing environment where, the $5-6 futures we saw in corn over the last handful of years, and $11, $12, $13 beans, if not more. Some of that stuff has gone by the wayside right now. It appears with what we know today. So it's going to be when opportunity pops up and you can make a good sale, it's going to be you got to sell it basically. So it's just being ready and having targets in place and being able to capture that opportunity when it pops up.
Where people can find you for your consulting services for their grain marketing?
Well, I would say as far as for local stuff, if there's a local CHS elevator near you, work with those folks. For hedging needs and things like that, they can visit us at CHS Hedging and reach out to us from there.
Do you have any final thoughts or recap of our conversation about the world supply and demand report?
What I would say is what the world supply is concerned is, obviously we're watching what's going on down in Brazil. You got Brazil's looking at a record crop, massive bean crop coming, and the weather looks good down there. Then we got to see how the safrinha crop shakes out as well. Argentina may have some La Nina concerns hitting them, so we'll watch and see what happens there. Russia's having, has a poor rated wheat crop right now heading into dormancy, so that may be something we got to watch as it pertains to our markets. But there's always stuff to watch and pay attention to. We're just kind of stuck in a cyclical news cycle right now, where that's the bulk of it, I guess, is just kind of checking in and seeing how things are updated day to day.
Thanks, Nick.
Yep, thank you. Appreciate it.
This is Nick Paumen from CHS Hedges in Minnesota on back roads of Illinois. Thanks to all of our guests for today's program. We're running out of time, but you can listen on YouTube channel for the show and whenever you get your podcast. This has been Back Roads of Illinois. I am Cesar Delgado. You have a great weekend.